Beyond Survival: The Radical Journey to Self-Love and Healing. Welcome, everyone. I stand before you today with a heart full of gratitude for the profound insights I've gained from my recent conversation with Kenyah Lev El, a true revolutionary in the field of Black mental health advocacy. Kenya isn't just changing the conversation around healing, they're transforming lives, dismantling generations of silence, and creating pathways to wholeness for communities that have historically been left to fend for themselves. Their work represents a beacon of hope, illuminating the journey from merely existing to genuinely thriving for Black professionals navigating systems that were never designed with their wellness in mind. What struck me most about our conversation was how Kenya articulates the journey from merely existing to truly living, a transition that requires us to embrace three powerful truths that I'm eager to share with you today. Have you ever wondered why, despite all your accomplishments, something still feels missing? Why the cape of strength we've worn for so long sometimes feels more like a burden than a badge of honor? Why success on paper doesn't always translate to peace in your spirit? The answer might lie in what we've never been taught: how to parent ourselves, reparenting, self love, resilience. These aren't just buzzwords or trendy concepts for Instagram captions. For Black women, especially, those who've led teams, raised families, held down households, carried communities, these concepts represent a radical reclamation of our right to wholeness. Let's talk about reparenting first. Many of us grew up in environments where emotional needs weren't always met, not because we weren't loved, but because our parents and grandparents were often fighting their own battles against systemic barriers and generational trauma. They gave us what they had, which was often survival skills rather than emotional intelligence tools. A comprehensive study from Ontario examined over 12,000 Black and white middle and high school students to understand mental health service usage. The findings were sobering, but not surprising. Black adolescents, especially girls, were significantly less likely to access mental health services, even as their distress increased. Think about that for a moment. Even as the pain grows, the help diminishes. The barriers were familiar: stigma, lack of culturally competent providers, systemic racism. But what struck me most was the backstory. Black youth often only access care in crisis, leading to worse outcomes and further mistrust of the system. This isn't just a statistic. This is the lived reality for so many of us who learned early that our pain wasn't a priority, that we needed to be strong. That vulnerability was a luxury we couldn't afford, and so we grew up. We achieved, we excelled, we survived, but at what cost? This is where reparenting enters the conversation. Reparenting isn't about blaming those who raised us, it's about recognizing that we now have the power to give ourselves what we may not have received: emotional validation, permission to rest, freedom to feel, space to heal. As Kenya so powerfully articulated, reparenting yourself, learning to nurture and care for your own emotional well being, can be transformative, especially when culturally competent care is not always accessible. Reparenting looks like catching yourself in those moments of harsh self criticism and asking, would I speak this way to a child I love? It's about creating new neural pathways that allow for gentleness, for mistakes, for growth. It's revolutionary work, and it's necessary work, because here's the truth: you cannot pour from an empty cup. Which brings me to our second vital truth: self love is not selfish, it is essential. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. Self love sounds nice, but I have responsibilities. People depend on me. I don't have time for bubble baths and affirmations. But that's not what we're talking about here. Self love isn't frivolous, it's foundational. Howard University recognized this when they addressed rising suicide rates in the Black community by offering comprehensive mental health and wellness resources. The statistics were alarming. Suicide rates among Black Americans, especially youth and young adults, have surged in recent years. The barriers to seeking help remain persistent. Stigma, racism, and systemic obstacles that make accessing care feel impossible. But Howard focused on breaking stigma, increasing culturally relevant support, and building community based prevention programs. Their initiatives have become a model for other HBCUs and Black led organizations nationwide, helping shift the narrative around mental health and suicide in the Black community. This is what happens when we take self love seriously, and when we recognize that caring for our mental health isn't a luxury, but a necessity. Practicing self love means recognizing your inherent worth, setting boundaries, and prioritizing your mental health. This is especially important for Black professionals who often face additional pressures and stigma around seeking help or expressing vulnerability. Self love is saying no without guilt, it's setting boundaries without apology, it's resting without explanation, it's understanding that you deserve care not because of what you do, but because of who you are. And this brings us to our third truth. Resiliency is about more than surviving, it's about thriving. The ability to bounce back from setbacks is often celebrated as a hallmark of Black excellence. We pride ourselves on our capacity to endure, to overcome, to push through. And there is power in that resilience. But true resilience isn't just about weathering storms, it's about learning to dance in the rain, it's about seeking support, building community, and breaking cycles of silence around mental health. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services highlights persistent mental health disparities for Black Americans, especially in treatment access and outcomes. Black Americans experience major depressive episodes and psychological distress at rates similar to or greater than the general population, but are less likely to receive treatment. The backstory is familiar. Generational trauma, racism, and economic disparities have shaped mental health outcomes in Black communities for decades. But here's where resilience comes in, not as a badge of honor for suffering in silence, but as a commitment to healing out loud. The data has fueled advocacy for policy changes and funding for Black mental health initiatives, leading to national recognition of the need for systemic change. This is resilience reimagined, not just surviving the system, but working to transform it, not just enduring pain, but seeking healing, not just pushing through, but pausing when necessary. As Kenya emphasized in our conversation, true resilience includes seeking support, building community, and breaking cycles of silence around mental health. So, where do we go from here? How do we integrate these truths into our daily lives? I want to challenge you to commit to one act of self love or reparenting this week. Maybe it's setting a healthy boundary with someone who consistently drains your energy. Perhaps it's seeking out a culturally competent therapist who understands your lived experience. Or maybe it's simply giving yourself grace for past struggles, recognizing that you did the best you could with the tools you had at the time. Whatever it is, take that step. Break the cycle of silence. Prioritize your mental wellness. Because here's what I know to be true: when you heal, generations heal with you. When you set boundaries, you create permission for others to do the same. When you practice self love, you model what's possible for everyone watching. Your journey matters. Your healing is possible. And embracing reparenting, self love, and resiliency is a radical, necessary act of self care and empowerment. I'm reminded of a powerful affirmation. I release the cape of strength that was never mine to wear. I embrace the softness that was always my birthright. This journey isn't about abandoning our strength, it's about redefining it. It's about understanding that sometimes the strongest thing we can do is admit we're not okay. Sometimes the bravest act is asking for help. Sometimes the most powerful choice is choosing ourselves. This is especially true for those of us who identify as high achieving Black women, those who have spent years in survival mode. We've led teams, raised families, held down households, carried communities. But now, many of us are exhausted and we're ready to shift from constantly grinding to finally grounding in joy, peace, softness, and self prioritization. The journey to self love isn't just about aesthetics or trends, it's about a spiritual, emotional, and mental recalibration. It's about dropping the superwoman cape and embracing the radical notion that softness is not weakness. It's a profound act of self love. As I stand here today, I want to leave you with this challenge. What if your healing isn't just for you? What if your journey to self love isn't selfish, but sacred? What if by choosing yourself, you're actually changing the world? Because when you break generational patterns, you're not just healing yourself, you're healing your ancestors and liberating your descendants. When you set boundaries and practice self care, you're not just preserving your energy, you're modeling a new way of being for everyone in your sphere of influence. This is the revolution that begins within. This is the quiet, powerful transformation that changes families, communities, and ultimately societies. So today, I don't just invite you, I implore you to take that first courageous step toward reparenting yourself with compassion, loving yourself without condition, and building resilience that allows not just for survival, but for joy, for peace, for the fullness of life that has always been your birthright. The world doesn't just need your productivity, it needs your presence. It doesn't just need your strength, it needs your softness. It doesn't just need you to survive, it needs you to thrive. And that journey begins now with one brave step towards healing.